Welcome to today's webinar. Canada's at the brink, Alberta's red line, or is it? Global tensions are reshaping alliances, and Canada is not immune. As the world contends with economic warfare, rising protectionism, and shifting power dynamics, domestic unity is also under strain. Alberta, long a pillar of Canada's economic engine, is now drawing a red line. Premier Danielle Smith, with the non-negotiable demands, she's presented 6 of them to Ottawa. She signaled a serious shift in tone from frustration to ultimatum. Is this the start of a national reckoning? KEI is exploring whether Canada can preserve unity in the age of growing regional assertiveness, or whether Alberta's stance marks a turning point in Confederation's future. I've asked Mark MacDonald from Vancouver, or Nanaimo actually, and Bill Jones here in Edmonton, and Barry Cooper in Calgary, University of Calgary. They'll join us today as a panel and share with us their various insights on the topic. So Barry, I'm going to start with you, and you've got a short timeline. I know you've got to get to class at 5 o'clock. So is what we are facing right now different? And would you say this is in fact a real threat to Canada's sovereignty?
Yeah, I'd say it is. I've come to a conclusion over the last year or so that Canadian history has been punctuated by a series of crises, and I won't go through the whole thing, but the last one was the incredibly rapid secularization of Quebec. The constitutional reflection of that was the 1982 Constitution. The current crisis that we're in is the shift in the economic power of Saskatchewan and Alberta, and the inability or unwillingness of Laurentian Canada to make any concessions to these 2 provinces. That's the constitutional crisis. It hasn't come to a complete head yet, but I think that's what's behind Danielle's, let's say, rather firm statements in the last little while.
It's interesting. I was musing this afternoon as I was doing some extensive gardening now that the spring is here, that in Eastern Canada, you monitor climate change. In Western Canada, we monitor the price of oil. Both consider them existential crisis, one long-term and one short-term. Bill, you've been watching this topic. I mean, you're the founder of Independence Alberta. What do you think? Do you think we're facing a serious reckoning of Alberta actually staying, or Alberta and Saskatchewan, Alberta, Yukon? I mean, it could be more than just Alberta, but what are your views?
Well, absolutely. Western independence, particularly Alberta, I believe is inevitable. Nation states are dissolving into more regional entities. It's a global phenomena. Canada is not immune to it, neither is the United States. So we have that pull that's beyond just our Canadian issues. Secondly, there's always an issue where political power is held by a group here in the Laurentian elite, and economic power is held by the West, dominated by Alberta. And if those don't get reconciled, it's inevitable that there's going to be an independence movement, especially on the economic side. We've seen it on a global basis. Czechoslovakia was a recent example of that. So I don't see politically power is never given or granted or released. So I can't imagine how the Laurentians will give up their political power to appease Alberta. And it paints everybody into a corner of the red line, as Premier Smith alluded to. But I think it's even more a concrete line. It's just not a line in the sand, that without the East giving up some political power, which I do not see them doing, it's inevitable that Alberta and perhaps Saskatchewan and the territories create a different set of circumstances on the national level, whether it's independence or a loosely federated territory or whatever. I don't have any insight on that because that's down the line farther than I can see. But I do see a reckoning coming for Canada.
The U.S. went through a period where states' rights became a fundamental political issue. And it got resolved by the states asserting themselves in the Union and recognizing that states' rights were superior. Do we have a party? Have we had a party that argues in the interests of the provinces, in the interests of unity, that maybe it's time Canada grew up and recognized that there are provincial interests. They need to be recognized. We don't have a Senate, not one that one can elect in any case, but how do you get unity as a primary issue? Mark, are you giving this any thought?
Well, I don't know if you can. I think one of the tacks that Premier Smith has taken is she's starting to make noises about we want exactly what Quebec has, and I think if that's the goal that you'd mentioned, that's about the only way you're going to get it. And then if Alberta, I mean, it's interesting. I wrote early on in Justin Trudeau's tenure that the first Trudeau came to ruin Alberta, and this one has come to finish it off. But what Alberta has now as an option is Donald Trump. And what if Donald Trump comes forward with an offer to say, listen, we'll give you unlimited resource extraction, we'll give you the dollar at par, and no transfer payments, and oh, by the way, respect. How does they not look at that as another negotiating ploy to get at least what the benefits that Quebec has? And then it's who's next? Saskatchewan has to be after that.
Well, surveys have indicated that there's some sympathy. It certainly isn't the majority. I think in the extreme, it's in the 30%, 32% range here in Western Canada that separation would be viable. I'm not sure everybody's going to jump on that bandwagon, but 32% is not lightweight. That's a fairly significant number, and it's been around for a while, and it's certainly risen. Whether or not a deal could be made. You mentioned Trump, the art of the deal, whether Trump would come forward and go that far to do anything other than 51st state to make an offer. Barry, what do you think the terms might be? I mean, if remaining in Canada is conditional, what needs to get fixed?
Well, I've often said to my American pals, reintroduce the Northwest Ordinance, and the territory can apply for the status of a state. I think you mentioned Trump's art of the deal. That was the model for that was Sun Tzu's Art of War. The first sentence of which says, war is all about deception. And I think one of the mistakes that a lot of Canadians make is to think that Trump is stupid. When I think the opposite is exactly true. People used to say that about Ralph Klein as well, and he loved it when people made that really dumb mistake. I think that if President Trump really has eyes on any part of Canada, it will be Alberta and Saskatchewan, and he'll make a deal that he'll make it work. It's at 30 whatever percent it is now, but that can change pretty quickly. And the difference between independence for Alberta and Saskatchewan and independence in Quebec is that we can afford it, and they never could. They have been dependent on Anglophone provinces from the get-go. They hate it when you point that out, but the evidence is overwhelming. So if there is a genuine independence movement here, it'll be serious in a way that the Quebec ones never, ever were.
I want to make sure that we're clear on just what the concerns that Danielle is expressing are. It may be obvious to many of us, but to some of the newcomers, they may not appreciate what it is that is of concern to Danielle Smith and has been of concern to premiers in Alberta and Saskatchewan for some time now, and for residents in Western BC or Eastern BC. It's not just access to tidewater with pipelines. It's just not recognition that Alberta is making significant financial contributions through repatriation revenues. But Bill, what are the basic points of concern to Western Canada?
So Stephen Harper wrote an interesting book, and the essence was the difference between can live anywhere and the people have to live here. So the split generally between urban and rural constituencies. And the East is dominated by the urban, they can live in London just as well to do their work as they can in Toronto. And so they have a more globalist view. Albertans were still attached to the land, so it's pretty hard to move to Europe if you're a farmer and you can't take your land with us. So there's a difference in the whole psychology of the region here. And the issue is that dominance of economic disparity, where, as you pointed out, Alberta is funding and feeding the nation without its political representation, which again was the argument of the United States. And just a quick point about that 30%. The 30% for independence or separation, if you glue those two together, they are a different concept, but let's glue them together, is a strongly held 30%. The rest are loosely held. You'll have a significant, call it another 25, 30% that are Canadians no matter what. They'll sacrifice their home to save Canada. But the rest are soft. And I call them pocketbook separatists or independents. Anytime the economy gets bad, independence goes up. And when it gets better, independence goes down. So we really have to watch the economics of West versus East for the support of any independence movement. Economics is the mother of politics. So I think that'll play out very strongly if the Liberals win once again, and Premier Smith's red lines aren't addressed appropriately.
You've referred to the transition that Alberta would need to go through as conforming with the Succession Act. For those that you aren't aware, there is in Canada a Succession Act that lays down the various steps that any province would need to go through. And I think one of the first is a referendum. Barry, are you aware of what the points in that Succession Act are?
Yeah. They're pretty much all of the effective decisions are in the hands of Parliament. They're not in the hands of the province that happens to be voting on secession. The Supreme Court said a clear majority on a clear question. But that is not decided in the courts. That's decided in Parliament in Ottawa. You could have a question: do you want to get out of Canada? Yes or no? And it gets 97% yes. Parliament could still say that's not a clear question and a clear majority. So there's a lot of I don't know. I think there's a lot of fraudulence about the Clarity Act, and it was touted by the Liberals at the time as a way of dealing once and for all with Quebec separatism. I think that's just rubbish. The only thing that matters, so far as I can see, is the politics of it, and that means getting the Americans on side. And nobody else counts. Certainly, Laurentian Canada doesn't count. They can't do anything. But if the Americans are not on side, then it won't happen.
Well, there is an initiative at the present time called Fortress America, which we've been translating as Fortress North America, of bringing further economic integration and recognizing that we've got a huge advantage in Canada. And one of them is that relationship with the United States as an economic engine and also as a source of defense. I mean, how many nations have a neighbor that can offer what the U.S. could offer to Canada, whether or not we were an independent nation, or whether we remain an independent nation or become a state? I don't think it's typically recognized, this anti-American sentiment that seems to prevail in Canada, that we have a huge advantage that we really don't seem to want to respect. We seem to, well, it's like living with a bully. And we feel we just got to keep on challenging the bully because we don't want to be bully ourselves. Mark, what's your view on that? Is living next to the U.S. one of our biggest problems, or is it an asset?
Well, I think it's both, Perry. Unfortunately, mostly this previous government has just chosen to take the lazy route to service the one customer. And by not allowing East and West pipelines, for example, we were landlocked, and we don't have proper sources to get our resources to different markets. So if we had, a pipeline that fed into Asia, get our resources there, and we had one to Europe, if Trump said we were going to put 100% tariffs on Canada, so what? We wouldn't care. But we're just absolutely paralyzed with the way that we're set up. So I think we've taken the easy route because they're so strong. But Trump has made noise, and rightfully so. Like even Canada's not meeting its NATO requirements. We're not spending anything. So as far as defending itself, Canada's not even in a position to do that. In my lifetime, it's the weakest we've ever been on every level, and it's the worst possible time to negotiate with someone like Trump, who thrives on it. Right?
Well, he thrives on an appreciation of the necessity to have a strong economy, and we've lived for several generations now in the belief that the economy will take care of itself, and yet we now have one of the weakest economies in the West. We've spent a lot of time on social engineering, but very little time in terms of maintaining the productivity or what is necessary to make this a viable economic engine. Barry, you want to add anything to that little lecture?
The only thing I'd add is that one of the reasons why Canadians have this suspicion of the United States is because they were the losers of the American Revolution. They were founded by loyalists, particularly in southwestern Ontario. That's not going to change. What Ontario compliments itself on is controlling us, and that's what we don't like. So, it's you've got a couple of incompatible assumptions going on here, and how it gets worked out is what will, really show whether or not we have the ability to run our own affairs.
Well, it's interesting when you think about Eastern Canada as a manufacturing center and having reasonable access to Detroit, New York, Boston, the markets of the East, even Quebec has access. The West has typically fed its resources to the East for manufacturing. But over time, the Western U.S. has become a powerhouse as well. Maybe we got formed just after the American Revolution, the War of 1812, and that loyalist sentiment, that passion for the king and to remain aligned with Europe was strong then. I'm not sure it's so strong anymore. Bill, do you want to add anything to whether or not we are still a dominion and mentally still part of the Commonwealth?
We're still part of the Commonwealth here in the West. I see that, but we're definitely aligned north-south. The big divide and decision was the Civil War of the United States. That actually created Canada as we know it, with the Americans leaving the war with the largest military in the world at the time, and of course completely planted in North America, scared the heck out of the British Empire, and hence the railway and 1867 to try to connect whatever territories we could in the face of an overwhelming army. Unfortunately, the Americans were not so inclined to move into the Northwest with that army. They dealt with other issues like Mexico and etc. So it definitely, the West was formed into Canada very much differently than the East. As Dr. Cooper pointed out, it's the loyalist of the 1812 war. We're created from the pioneer and Wild West that, the United States shares with that. And our introduction into the Canada was by desperation. And we have that national emergency railway that connected across the Canada as we know it today, to try to connect those two in a desperate situation to bring in BC so it didn't move to the United States sphere. So it is arguable that's what we need today, is the same national program, except we'll call them pipelines instead of railways. But I seriously do not think Canada is going to do such a thing. The East, as you pointed out, are very ideologically different than the West. And I just don't see any motivation for them to change the way they are, given their political power. And what can you beat with that other than independence?
So if these issues are going to prevail, and Western Canada remains alienated, and Danielle Smith has put an ultimatum in front of the next prime minister, giving her or him, I guess with him, 6 months to resolve these issues, we then face change. Change comes slow in government. What is she going to do? Bill, you've talked about the slow walk to independence. What does that mean?
Well, the slow walk is just a maturity, just like Canada did in excising itself from Great Britain. It takes 100 years. You mature your institutions and your capability, and you assume more responsibility as a nation state over time. And eventually, you end up with the Queen sitting across the table from the Prime Minister Trudeau, and you sign a document, and it's a glorious day for everyone there. You've matured into a nation state. That's the far more preferred route to becoming an independent nation. But this is very unlikely given Canadians' situation. We're stuck with financial collapse of Canada, and then you have to say, is Alberta ready to take up its nationhood? And I do not see it. We don't have our police, we don't have our tax, we don't have our pensions, we don't have our immigration, we barely have our industry, our resources. If Canada failed tomorrow, we'd be a failed nation state like Somalia or Sudan or something like that. We're just not ready, and that's my most serious concern. Is we've not moved as a province or even a region to even entertain the consequences of independence, even when it's thrust upon us. So I'm very, very worried that we're not, as a province or a region, moving to that independence. And we can be in independence within the nation state of Canada by assuming our own provincial responsibilities that we've abdicated to the federal government. There's no reason we can't do that, and those are essential. But I'm really concerned that we're not ready, and we're going to be thrust into that, and literally overnight having to establish all these institutions that right now don't exist.
Okay, so even if you're a supporter that we need to get ready for separation, there's a lot to be done in order to establish the institutional infrastructure, the taxing, the police force, the various things that would be necessary in order to maintain one's integrity. Quebec has been doing that, whether or not it's prepared for separation or simply saying, we recognize that there are provincial rights. We want provincial rights. That's a start. That isn't necessarily a sentiment of separation. It's simply saying we're recognizing the regional interests. Barry, do we have to go all the way, or is simply the recognition of provincial interests simply the next phase of Canada's evolution?
Yeah, if Laurentian Canada is willing to discuss these things seriously, and I also don't see that there's much chance of that. One of the reasons is because of the what I've called the myth of national unity, which means Laurentian, the continued Laurentian rule over the rest of the country. They're not going to give that up. On the side of Alberta, I mean, certainly Danielle Smith has and some of the other people in her cabinet have made it pretty clear what needs to be done. And in response, nobody asked me to predict it, but it's so obvious. She's considered as one of these bright lights in Laurentian Canada, said a traitor. Well, okay, that's the way you guys think. That's what'll happen. My alarm just went off, which means I have to go now because I got about a 10-minute walk to my class. So,
is there any last minute points you want to make before you leave? Points you may have been prepared, and I didn't pose any question to you. Any closing comments?
The only thing, I think we're actually in some very interesting times that will be a big test, both for the integrity of Alberta and for the imagination of our erstwhile fellow citizens in Laurentian Canada. I think it's going to be really interesting.
Well, stay tuned, Barry. Okay. We may do this again after the election. You have indicated before this that if Carney gets elected with little sympathy for Western interests, we got ourselves a crisis. Mark, I've left you alone for a little while.
one of the things that has really caught my attention is younger people
Mhm.
are interested in the 51st state idea. Now, the 51st state, I believe, was just simply Trump being Trump, intimidating, embarrassing Trudeau. And that's just the way he does things. I don't think it makes any sense for the United States to try to make Canada 51st state. Why would they want, for example, Quebec? Why would they want that, right?
Mhm.
Why would they want the Maritimes? But the younger people that I've been running into, and I'm surprised because I think they come from different political spectrums than I do, they say, I want to hear more. I want to hear more. And so people our age and around that age, they say, well, we know Canada a certain way. They're looking at this Canada. This Canada is not working for me. Like I can't buy a home. I can't, the usual litany of problems that they have. What does this Canada do for them? They don't really have a comparable. And so if they say Trump says, okay, well, it's a dollar at par and less income tax and all the other things that he would bring forth in a negotiation, they will. I'm shocked, but they're saying I want to hear more.
Yeah,
And
it's very interesting, Barry. I'm hearing the same thing, and I've seen some
yeah, it's
some
shocking
research.
to know. Yeah,
Seen some research along the same lines that youth is not sort of caught up with the nationalism that may
no,
be more prevalent after World War II or as a byproduct of the Trudeau mania. But if our youth are more sober on this topic, then they would want to hear, and it would be very valuable for Canada to have a discussion about what is Canada and why do we love it so much? What is inherent? I mean, Trudeau went public with the United Nations. The World Economic Forum said that Canada has no framework. It should have no border. We should live in a borderless world. It's a World Economic Forum. We should be globalists. Well, postmodern neoliberalism was to prevail. Seems to me we're in reverse of that now with recognizing that the economy can't handle that. The red line. Just one more moment before we open up the discussion. I'm going to ask Bill this question. This is in Danielle Smith's hands. She's the one that laid out the red line, which we're calling it. She's put the ultimatum forward to whoever is the prime minister. I've seen Obama refuse to cross the red line when Iraq or Iran violated his ultimatum. Is Danielle Smith got the ball? Does Danielle Smith have the courage to take on crossing of the red line?
That's an
Yes.
excellent question. I think so. The existential threat to Alberta and our economy and our people here is absolutely under threat if these issues aren't addressed in some way. Now, is the red line a thick red line or a thin red line? Is there negotiation? Certainly, but something needs to be dealt with and not delayed. I mean, typically government and even Premier Smith and Kenny with their Kenny's referendum, nothing's been done on it. Danielle Smith did the pension thing. She didn't do anything about it. Now we're advocating for a provincial police force. There's been pushback, and will she bend to the pushback and not do anything with it? She does have a history of not doing anything about it, and she's not alone. I'm not blaming her. It's provincial politics, and trying to get the people of Alberta on board or recognizing that they're not on board. We still have politics, but something needs to be done, and be totally frank, if she doesn't do it, I will. And the independence movement is getting stronger and it's getting up steam. And if Carney comes in, I think it's going to be a wildfire across the prairies, including Saskatchewan. And I don't know if she can quell that fire without doing something herself. And that's the question. Does the UCP want to be in the leadership position for Alberta independence, whatever you define that to be, within Canada or without? Or will she be swept aside by the wildfire, the more vivid and extreme version of that independence, which includes separation from Canada? It'll be her call, but I don't envy her position, because she's got, me and others breathing down her on one side. And what is she going to do with Eastern Canada on the other side? She's going to be in a vice, and it'll be interesting to see what she does. I like Danielle Smith. She's very intelligent, and I do support her whenever she supports Alberta as her primary goal, as she should. So I'm not an enemy. I may be an adversary, but I'm a friendly adversary.
Mark, it's hard not to see the value in having this discussion, in doing sessions like this. We've done a session in Calgary, we did one in Edmonton, they were sold out. It seems to me there's value of Canada having a frank discussion about why Canada, why provinces, and what it means to be a province. Our youth seem to be thirsting for it. They're not getting it in their schools. Bill is making a point, though. If an ultimatum is not honored, we could be in for a very heated period without having had prior discussion or sober understanding. Your article was quite sober. I don't know how well it was picked up nationally. I certainly picked it up. It seems to me there's a thirst in Canada to have this discussion now, but I don't hear this discussion going on during this election. Is there a question that you would like to pose to the candidates, the federal candidates for Prime Minister? What question would you like to ask them, Mark?
Well, I would just stick to the pipeline issue. I think that is the issue. If Poilievre gets in and they are able to open up the Northern Gateway and Energy East, then I think a lot of this discussion is not going to go away. It's going to be muted, because I think that Alberta is going to be the beachhead on which this discussion takes any kind of form. And Smith provides the leadership and the voice. She's very articulate, that she will be able to bring those issues forward. Quebec, everybody just, they just like to fight, and then they do their own thing, and they're basically live off of transfer payments from Alberta. It's beyond me how Quebec says no to Energy East when all the transfer payments money comes from Alberta.
$1 trillion since 2020. So you're of the view that the pipeline is a symptom of the bigger issue, but if we resolve that symptom, we would do so in recognition that we are contributing to unity.
No question. And we, these vague references to Canada becoming a world economic power would be realized because we'd have access to those other markets. Mentioned in other articles about, Germany comes cap in hand to Ottawa. We need your LNG. Trudeau says there's no business case. Japan does the same response. Trump says, okay, he signs a deal with them. Like those revenues could be ours. And we look at all the social programs that Canada demands now. We can't even afford them. But if we had a truly solid resource extraction and development plan for the country, all those things would be looked after. If you look at the Middle East with what they have in terms of natural resources, other than the oil in the ground, it's sand and sun. And they're absolutely gobs of money. So we can have that too, and that benefits everybody. But it starts with Alberta. So I don't believe the polls to really blunt. I do expect that Poilievre is going to win. I think it still would be a small majority. But if he doesn't, this whole conversation, and I think the future of the country is fragile, because Carney's doubled down. Carney was the brains behind Trudeau, economically anyway, if you call it brains. And Alberta's just not going to take it anymore, as far as I can tell.
Has Carney taken a position on the pipeline?
Yeah, he said we will not back down on Bill C-69. We won't. Period.
So the forecast is we're going to have a crisis if the Liberals.
If he gets it, no question.
Okay, I'm going to look for show of hands. Jeff, I've been reading your chats, and you're the one of several that have a high level of suspicion that this is not likely where we should be going. Do you have any question you want to pose to Mark or to Bill, or any comments you wish to make?
Well, I see Bill has responded partly in the chat, but I think the biggest issue that nobody's considering is, let me just start by saying, yeah, on paper, it looks great. If Alberta was to become independent, all of these oil revenues would stay in our hands. our taxes would stay in the province, and that would be wonderful. The trouble is that we're not seeing the bigger picture, I don't think. Imagine how much it's going to cost to renegotiate trade deals around the world, military treaties, all of the rest of it. It's a huge undertaking. But for me, one of the biggest questions is, how will the Indigenous populations handle it? And they have rights at the negotiation table if any province wants to separate under the law, equal rights. And I'm not aware of any Indigenous group that is calling for independence. All of their treaties are with the Crown and with the federal government. They have nothing to do with the province. So I think this is a huge stumbling block that needs to be addressed before we even consider this kind of thing. Not to mention, I don't think there's a stomach for it. 30% is a long way from a clear majority. It's good to talk about, I suppose, but
the general sentiment of the discussion has been that the federal government ought to address the issues that Danielle has raised, and if they address them, we've got provincial rights equivalent to Quebec. We have a nation. That there's a way out of this crisis, which is to recognize Alberta's rights under the Constitution.
Yeah, and I think that Carney has said that he'd be in support of a pipeline to Hudson Bay in Churchill or possibly in Port Nelson. So it's a different thing. I don't think that Carney is, yes, he certainly supported the environmental policies under the Trudeau government, but I think he might be having a change of heart under the political realities that we're currently facing.
So what question would you raise? What question would you ask him?
I would like to get clarity on his position. I mean, he has said that he is in favor of building sort of a northern energy transport route. So that would be an option. That would avoid having to go through Quebec and all of the political, landmines in that case. And I think that it would be a great way to develop the Arctic as well, which of course is an interest of mine. So.
Yeah, all right. I'm looking for hands. Otherwise, you're at risk that I might call on you.
So I'll respond to Jeff. Yes, First Nations are fundamental to independence. They still own the land. So, however, they're as frustrated with Ottawa as we are. And it is their right to change and we have to be clear here. No treaty has been signed with Canada, except in British Columbia. We'll leave that aside. No treaty has been signed with Canada. It's been signed with the Crown. Two sovereigns signing a deal. So Canada is merely the administrator of the treaties within Western Canada, excluding British Columbia. And they can change the administrator as they wish, and they can select the administrator as the Lieutenant Governor of Alberta or Saskatchewan. Is this something that needs to be done? Yes. Is it easy? Absolutely not. But they will need to be part of the dialogue. However, Alberta can still exercise its provincial rights and even more, as Quebec has with its language legislation. And that's what a nation state de facto does, is it, once it's seized all its provincial rights, continues to impose itself upon federal rights and keeps inching that yardstick further and further and further. That's what Canada did versus the British North American Act. Again, in World War II, we made our own declaration of war against Germany. That was not allowed within the British North American Act, but Great Britain accepted it. And that was just pushing that yardstick further. And we were a founding member of the United Nations and we're on the Security Council. We were not legally a nation. We were still under Great Britain, yet we sat at that table. These are the things that you have to do by law and walk. Keep exercising national powers until de facto in 1982, a piece of paper gets signed and now you're de jure by law an independent country. So do we have time to do that? That's the big issue. Great Britain was not under threat of financial collapse like Canada is. And so I think, no matter whether you're a full on, hardcore separatist or independence within Canada, the road is the same. We have to start exercising our provincial rights firmly, strongly, and immediately. And I hope the red lines that Premier Smith has put down on the table is a demonstration of those facts.
Fortress America was driven primarily by Donald Trump recognizing and Americans recognizing the $37 trillion deficit is unsustainable, and adding $2 trillion a year is unsustainable, and the maintaining of the oceans police force was unsustainable, and that sooner or later the United States needed to come to grips that it was overextended, and that it had liabilities which were committed to in social security and healthcare that were going to add to this with an aging population significantly. You indicated Canada may be facing a similar dilemma. I've not heard a lot of discussion about Canada's economy being at risk, other than being the lowest producer in the G7.
And that's absolutely correct, Perry. And the reason is the political center of Canada, Eastern Canada, has not felt economic pain until the tariffs that Trump has put in. They've been relying on the transfer payments and equalization of Alberta to make up their budgets. So they've not felt the economic realities of the Canadian debt. Western Canada has. And Eastern Canada is humming on just fine. Their provincial budgets, they make it up with the transfer payments, so they can maintain that social safety net that garners those political votes for whether it's provincial or federal. They've not realized that the earners are struggling and starting to fall down onto their knees and unable to carry the load. I always use an analogy: when you're eating your seed corn, you put your hand inside the seed bag and you pull out a handful of seeds and eat it, and you're satisfied. You keep doing that over and over again. One day you pull out a full hand, but the next day there is not a full hand. It's falling off a cliff. You're done, and it sneaks up to you. And it's not a slow economic decline. It's falling off a cliff. One day you've got a full hand of grain, the next day you don't, and then you're suddenly in trouble, and now you're going to have to deal with it. And that's Eastern Canada. They've been pulling our seed corn out of the West and slowly degrading our ability to support the economy of Canada, but they don't realize it. They're not suffering. We see the suffering with the oil prices up and down, the no pipelines, no shipping, et cetera, et cetera. We see it because it hurts our pocketbook every day. But you talk to someone in Toronto, they're very happy, other than, of course, recent events and due to Trump's tariffs. But before that, they were very happy. They did not see any economic issues. We say we only grew 1% or less than that. They didn't see that. We did. We saw that in Western Canada, where our industries were stagnated, and we still had to pay the same taxes and still had to provide the income for Eastern Canada.
So Trump triggered the sovereignty issue with his 51st state declaration. You're posing, and I haven't heard this addressed in the election forums, that Canada faces an economic crisis. Can Canada survive without Alberta? Can Canada survive at a $40 barrel of oil? I mean, we have continued to increase our offerings to the public, our public services to the public. We continue to grow the size of government. All of this sustainable by an economy, 25% of which is financed by Alberta. But if Alberta doesn't have at $40 barrel of oil, or as a product of separation, if Alberta isn't able to make that contribution, is Canada sustainable?
Yes, Canada is sustainable. We have to define, what does survive mean? Eastern Canada will survive. If we're saying survive at the same level of standard of living, absolutely not. They would have a substantial drop in the standard of living, but they would survive on their own, as would Alberta if we had such a shock. Our standard of living would go down significantly, but we would overcome and over time regain that and and flourish. And make no mistake, a lot of the independence movement, separation movement think once Alberta leaves Canada, we'll be paving our streets with gold. Nothing at all. We would suffer severe economic decline. The world would be very distrustful with us. It happens to every nation that becomes independent and new country. Nobody trusts. The institutions aren't there. The history isn't there. Again, that's why Canada took 150 years. Everybody believed in Canada. In 1982, nothing changed because everybody believed in Canada for 100 years. But a new nation called Alberta or Saskatchewan together, nobody believes in it. So we would seriously see an economic decline, regardless of our oil, regardless of our resources. Nobody would invest. But we would recover, as would Eastern Canada. So yes, we would survive. Everybody would see a substantial drop in their standard of living, but we would survive.
Okay, so we'd see a transition, and it's not unusual when you bring about change that there's going to be a transition period. Dale, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Bill. Wonderful, good information. There's a couple things that haven't been brought up today. One is that Carney went to Europe, his first trip, and then he had a very significant engagement with China. It looks like Brussels and China may in fact be more of a problem as far as looking at how Canada aligns than the US at this point, because as we see, or as I think the Freedom People would suggest, there has been a significant amount of NGO and foreign interference to develop what has been articulated as the push against Trump or the push against Alberta. Would you maybe comment on the Brussels and Chinese and how the US may be even a bit of a straw man?
So excellent question. So Carney is a globalist, and Fortress North America is anti-globalist. Hence the current administration's push to realign our region, North America region, into an economic and security zone. And Carney is absolutely against that. He believes that he can replace the United States with Europe and potentially Asia. But what he's missing, and what everybody misses, is our trade routes are guaranteed by the United States Navy, not our Navy, not Europe's Navy, not China's Navy. And if the United States decides to retract that protection, our trade to Europe or Asia becomes very, very tenuous. Think about the Persian Gulf issue. That's exactly what would be faced. And because it is so subtle, because the Americans have been doing it since the Second World War, we automatically assume those protections of the trade routes would be maintained by the US Navy. That is not the plan of Fortress North America. It's a retraction of that Navy, pulling back to its ports within North America and protecting its own region, and everyone else, good luck. And as I said in a couple of seminars hosted by Perry, you know, what Navy, Army, and Air Force are you going to do protect your merchant fleets? We don't have it. And if the Americans don't do it, yes, good luck. And I see it very short-sighted. They think it's long-term. Certainly it's long-term if the United States still engages in a global hegemony, but they've already indicated that that's not going to occur. Can the Americans punch their weight anywhere in the world? Absolutely. But they'll be far more discerning than they have in the past. It won't be every issue, every war, every situation. They'll pick and choose their own battles, whatever they happen to be. And they'll beat anybody for sure. But they can't afford protecting the world's Navy merchant fleets anymore. And we'll see that retraction. And I think it's very short-sighted of the globalist in Canada. And that's what the fight is between Canada and the United States, is the globalist Canada versus the North American Fortress America United States. We either join the United States or we're going to be cut loose, and good luck, Canada.
Well, there is obvious concern, Tommy, you've expressed it, of an alignment with the US when the US is going through its transition right now in recognition of its serious deficit problem, which is calling for a restructuring of the role of the public service, a restructuring of government, maybe the adoption of AI as an alternative. But it's hard to know what the US is going to become as a byproduct of the transitions that are currently underway. I'm going to skip that for a moment. Greg, you, and then I'm going to ask Mike. I think Mike
Just
has.
building, this is a comment and a question. Just building on that, Bill, and others, I'd like people to imagine, had Trump not been elected and the United States carried on with its then current path, the new world order since World War II, globalized free trade, it's created a lot of prosperity. It's also created a lot of environmental issues, and the United States of America cannot afford. They're beyond broke, trying to be the protecting of global trade routes. How do basically where we're at now might be very challenging for all, but losing the United States to economic collapse was a very big reality. How does that play out?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. The United States, I've read numerous articles of people who are very well informed that believe the United States have been beyond the tipping point, and it's inevitable of their collapse, regardless of Doge and all the retraction. I sincerely hope that's not the case, but they make very strong arguments just by the sheer economics of the situation. Obviously, the collapse of the United States is the collapse of the global order. That will actually accelerate regional Asia, Europe, North America, and closing off of each region in becoming more insular, more isolated, more isolationism, etc. And as far as Europe, good luck. It's been a very rare time since the end of the Second World War that Europe's been at peace, and we've seen the Ukraine issue come up. But France and Germany are not friends. They've been forced together by the EU. But if it becomes an isolationist thing, Europe will probably be inflamed. China is nearing its own collapse, and good heavens, if that goes down. You've got India that's becoming a superpower in the Southeast Asia. They are very strong and they're very united. So what will happen with that when China starts its collapse? And you talk about Kashmir and Pakistan, and you've got two nuclear weapon countries there. It's a mess. And that's why I really hope these very good experts are absolutely wrong and they're misreading something. I haven't found it, but I really pray for it, because the lack of U.S. hegemony on the world would be a collapse like the Roman Empire as far as the known world in the West. It'd be an unmitigated disaster. Would Alberta come out smelling like roses? Eventually. We are truly in God's country with all our resources and everything we have here, the people we have here, and where we are in the world, stuck in the middle of a continent. It'll take a lot to get to us, no matter who you are. But in the short term, yeah, a lot of suffering all the way around.
Hey, Mark, anything you want to interject here? Otherwise, I'm going to go off to Mike.
Well, I don't think the Alberta is an independent country, or even Saskatchewan doesn't make any sense in any way, shape, or form. I've made my thoughts known on it, that an economic union with America, perhaps there's some kind of stabilization and adoption of the U.S. currency, and that makes more sense. But all the political options, even many of them raised today, make it virtually impossible in our lifetime to see that happen. But I think, go back to the Premier Smith. I think what she's doing so far, so good. She hasn't made separatism an issue in the election, although she's certainly seeding the idea. So I give her 5 stars so far, and then we'll see what happens at the end of April.
I think the core issue appears to be provincial rights. that Alberta feels that its
Yeah.
rights are being violated. If those rights were recognized, we would resolve the issue. And the East-West pipeline is certainly a symptom of a way to go about resolving it. Mike, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a number of things. Let's start off by talking about the natives. You and I have had, when we were working up north on oil and gas, I had a lot of interaction with the natives. What they want is to be fully recognized partners. And I resolved that with our projects by giving them a 1% overriding royalty each. They took it, and that was it. They were with us all the way in terms of the development that we're proposing. Then on top of that, as soon as it became clear what the implications were for Canada of Trump's apparent policies, one of the chiefs in northern BC did a full 180 in terms of supporting the pipeline from Alberta to the coast. That that these are not stupid people. They're very, very smart, well-informed people, and they could see that if Canada goes down the toilet economically, they are the ones who are going to suffer most.
Right.
So
Okay,
I think it's very simple, not a difficult problem at all to get the native people on side. I know quite a lot of them. All right, chiefs and all the rest of it. Then coming back to the idea that Alberta has no recognition abroad, I don't agree with that at all. As a senior official of the Alberta government in the 1980s, I spent quite some time in Japan, and the door was open. They were interested in our oil and gas. They're still interested in, particularly in the gas. I got to see, to spend time with the Vice Minister of Science and Technology. I got to meet with the Vice President at one of the major automakers. I got to meet with very senior government officials in Japan. I got to meet with the head of science and technology for the major tech companies, computer companies in Japan. We've got a lot of clout over there, a lot of recognition.
And your third point.
Okay, then don't forget that Japan now has the second largest navy in the world. And it's quite capable of protecting its own sea lanes. The Japanese look way, way ahead. They're always looking 20 to 30 years ahead. That was the thing that came across to me really clearly with the time that I spent speaking with Japanese decision makers. And so they're already were realizing what was going to happen with the US and the protection of sea lanes, and they built up an enormous navy capable of doing that, because everything that they need, they import. They have no damn resources apart from human beings. They import just about everything, so they have to have secure sea lanes. They saw this coming.
Got it. Anything further? Because
I think that one of the things that was brought up is the 30% plurality in favor of independence for Alberta is a big problem. The problem is that with the way society has gone, with bureaucratization on all levels, including corporations and so on, you have a whole lot of people who really don't have any risk in the game, and they will take the safe play every time. And unfortunately, here in Alberta, we have got as big a problem with the bureaucrats as and people in the population who are hanging on to the hind teat of government as anybody in the country. It's a huge problem, and it may very well be insuperable.
So that is a principal differentiator between the liberal and conservative platforms in the coming election.
Yeah. And then finally, the world is in a mess. This is a dislocation of historic dimensions. You have to go back to the 17th century to find any parallel which is similar.
Okay, thank you.
I'm writing a book about it.
Thanks, Mike. And when that book is ready, I'm going to give you a full airing. Dale, can you be brief? Because I want to hear what Dawn has to offer as well. So go ahead, Dale.
Sure. I wanted to talk a little bit about Alberta and ask Bill. Bill, you're aware of Mitch Sylvester. You're aware of some of the challenges that are going on in the cabinet, the ministers that are holding Danielle's feet to the fire. How much is that going to play into this? Because we are going to have, I think, the European and Chinese influence and other NGOs as have been influencing Alberta and Canada. But this group has a push right now that may not be very balanced. Any comments on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. There's two opposite forces within the UCP government. You've got your Alberta Firsters, as the name suggests. Whatever Alberta needs, that's what needs to be done, regardless of whatever else. And you also have a significant component that are Canadians first, and as Alberta as a significant partner within Alberta. Now, on many issues, of course, they are aligned, but there are some defining issues that make them separate. And this is what Danielle Smith has to deal with on a daily basis. Both of them have a dominant component for her leadership and her government. She has to walk the very tight line between them. And as Perry said earlier, these red lines is she serious about them or not, and how thick they are and how malleable they are really comes down to her trying to appease both of these significant factions within her own party. And I don't envy her at all. I'm sure glad I'm not the premier right now, I'll tell you, with those two factions, because they're both very, very powerful. However, they are aligned to a significant degree in supporting Alberta in Canada. So they both agree on that. Where it diverges when you get more serious dialogues of where they separate, but they do align. Hence her initial thing about pensions. They do align on the recent police and the sheriff's issue. Those are the alignments, and she's trying to keep her coalition together on these very, very specific initiatives that they all agree on. And good luck to her. As I said, I'm a friendly adversary. She's doing a great job. I wouldn't give her 5 out of 5. I'd give her 4 out of 5. I think she could do more. I hate that she keeps asking permission to do a provincial right. I've told her about that personally. But again, I'm just one voice out of maybe 40 that bark in her ear on a daily basis. But
okay, well, the federal election will obviously be the next step, and that what happens 6 months later and what happens during that intervening period will be very interesting. Okay, Dawn, you may get the last word today. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Perry. Just a quick comment. I was taking a look at a number of indices, thinking about Fortress North America. And it's very interesting when you take a look at social indicators, governance, economic indicators. You take a look at the picture of Canada and the United States. together we're a lot stronger than we are independently, because where we have strengths, the US doesn't, and vice versa. And so I thought that was interesting. And a lot of these indicators just don't apply to government, but business as well. And when you consider the wealth of resources that both these countries have, financial, intellectual, natural resources, and the absolute wealth we've had, and over time, a lot of these indicators have been going in a positive direction, improving. But we've really taken a terrible turn, and things have really been deteriorating. Maybe the United States is going to get their act in order, but I really fear that Canada's going to be left behind, unless we have a government too that starts taking things seriously and is maybe a little bit more capable than what we've experienced, over the last 10 years.
I've been often accused as being a bit of a Pollyanna, of having rose-colored glasses and always looking at a crisis from a positive perspective. And I do believe there's a silver lining to what's taking place. And it's called sobering up. There are many things that seem to have been ignored as if we were ostriches. A nation secure, a nation that had its defense taken care of, a nation that had considerable wealth and a great future, a nation that was proud and civil. But things seem to be changing. And I'm hoping those changes are for the good, that we are going to be addressing some of these fundamental issues, that there will be an East-West pipeline, there will be a compromise of Quebec and unity, that we will find that Canada recognizing that my coffee cup doesn't have to be thrown away. I think the tenor of today has been, if Canada would only, if the Laurentian group, if federal government would only recognize what is in the Constitution as the rights of Alberta to its resources and to its development, all would be well again. It's that simple. So with that, I thank all of you for having joined me today. It was a very sober discussion. We really didn't get hostile. We didn't get angry. We did some thoughtful thinking. And thank you, Mark, for your input. Thank you, Barry, even though you're not here right now, and Bill, of course, always. So thank you all, and thanks for the chat on the side.